The Hells Angels biker heard the little girl cry under the bridge ice, and his justice split the river in two. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The wind was fierce that night, howling through the empty streets of a small town just outside of Chicago. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the streets were already coated in a thin layer of ice. Jake Reaper Morrison, a seasoned Hells Angels biker, was riding along the snow-covered highway, his Harley-Davidson roaring through the night. His leather jacket creaked as the wind whipped past him, and the heavy sound of his engine filled the air. But just as he was about to pass under a bridge, a sound caught his attention. A faint, terrified cry echoed through the night, carried by the wind. Jake's instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he slammed on the brakes. His bike skidded on the icy road, but he managed to stay upright, coming to a stop near the bridge. He had been trained for dangerous situations, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to find. Under the bridge, in the shadow of the frozen river, a small figure lay crumpled on the cold ground. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, was curled up on the icy pavement, crying for help. Her clothes were soaked, and she shivered uncontrollably, her face pale with fear and cold. Jake's heart clenched as he dismounted from his bike and rushed toward her. The girl was freezing, and the harsh winds of the winter night were not helping. He knelt beside her, his large, scarred hands reaching out to gently lift her from the ground. Her eyes widened in fear, and she recoiled, looking at him with a mix of terror and distrust. Hey, it's okay, Jake said softly, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone with such a fearsome reputation. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm going to get you out of here. The little girl's eyes searched his face, trying to gauge whether he was telling the truth. She seemed to weigh her options before nodding weakly, too exhausted to fight. Jake carefully wrapped his arms around her, feeling how light she was. Her small body trembled as he pulled her close for warmth. He quickly lifted her up, making sure to avoid the ice that had already started to form under their feet. As he carried her toward his bike, he noticed the bloodstains on her clothes and the bruises on her arms. The sight made his stomach churn. What kind of monster would hurt a child like this? Without wasting another moment, Jake climbed back onto his Harley, holding the girl in his arms as he revved the engine. The girl clung to him, her face buried in his chest, too frightened to speak. As they sped off into the night, Jake's thoughts raced. Who could have done this to her? What had happened? And why had she been left out here in the cold, alone and abandoned? He couldn't help but think of the little girl he had lost years ago, the one he never got to save. The pain of that loss still haunted him, and now, with this girl in his arms, the feelings were resurfacing, raw and unfiltered. As they drove through the icy streets, the wind howling around them, Jake's mind wandered back to that painful memory. He had failed to protect that little girl. But tonight, he wasn't going to fail again. He would make sure this girl was safe. As they reached his small, secluded cabin on the outskirts of town, Jake gently set the girl down and rushed inside to get blankets and warmth. He could hear her soft sobs as she sat on the couch, still in shock from the night's events. The storm outside raged on, but inside, there was a flicker of hope. Jake would not let her suffer any longer. He wasn't sure who had left her here or why, but one thing was certain. He wasn't about to let anyone hurt her again. And as he wrapped the blankets around her, the cold night seemed to soften. And for the first time in years, Jake felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Redemption. I could feel the weight of the girl's small body in my arms as we walked through the door of the cabin. The storm raged outside, but inside, the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth offered a kind of refuge. I placed her gently on the couch and draped the blankets over her, trying to keep her as warm as possible. She looked up at me, her wide eyes full of fear and exhaustion, but something about her seemed different now. She wasn't crying anymore. The terror that had been written across her face earlier had softened, and for the first time, she seemed like she might actually trust me. You're safe now, I said softly, my voice more gentle than I'd intended. She didn't respond, but her eyes never left me. I stood up slowly, watching her closely. There was so much I needed to do. Get her cleaned up, check for injuries, and try to figure out where the hell she came from. But something inside me told me to hold off, to let her rest for a moment. Maybe it was because I had lost someone like her before, and I knew better than anyone how fragile these moments could be. I made my way to the kitchen and poured myself a drink. The alcohol burned my throat, but it did little to ease the pressure in my chest. I kept thinking about her, this little girl, abandoned out there on that icy road, and I couldn't help but wonder how it had all come to this. Who would leave a child in a place like that? And why? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than she was letting on. When I turned back around, I noticed that she had managed to sit up, her small hands clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. She nodded, but her voice was quiet, like a whisper. "Where are you from?" I asked. She hesitated before answering, her gaze shifting down to her hands. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. I was just looking for my mom." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew what it was like to lose someone, to feel that emptiness. But this little girl was living it, and I could see the confusion and the fear in her eyes. "Your mom? Where is she?" I asked, kneeling down in front of her. She bit her lip and looked away. "I don't know," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. I think she left me." The silence between us felt heavy, suffocating. I could see that she was struggling to hold it together, trying so hard to keep the tears from spilling over. I couldn't stand it. I reached out, gently taking her hand. "You're not alone," I told her, my voice firm. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for the truth in my words. I wasn't sure what made me say it, but I meant it. I wasn't going to leave her. I couldn't. The night felt like it stretched on forever, but we didn't speak much after that. The girl curled up on the couch, her small body shaking with cold, but I could tell she was trying to find comfort in the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the cabin. I sat across the room, my mind racing. I had no idea where she came from or why she had been left alone in the storm. But one thing was clear, she needed me, and I wasn't about to let her down. The storm outside continued to howl, the wind whipping through the trees, but inside the cabin, there was a sense of calm, a moment of peace amidst the chaos. I couldn't help but think about the promise I had made to myself all those years ago. I had failed someone once, but this time, I wasn't going to fail again. I didn't know what was waiting for us outside, but I knew one thing. I would do whatever it took to protect this little girl. Just as I was about to sit down, the sound of a car engine roaring in the distance caught my attention. My heart raced. It was too close, too loud to be just any car, and it was heading straight toward the cabin. My hand instinctively went to the pistol I kept under the table, the cold steel reassuring in my grip. I didn't know who was out there, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I motioned for the girl to stay down, and she nodded, her eyes wide with fear. I could hear the engine getting closer, the roar of the tires skidding on the icy road. Whoever it was, they weren't slowing down. I stepped quietly toward the door, my boots silent on the wooden floor, and peered through the cracked window. The headlights from the approaching car blinded me for a moment, but as it got closer, I could make out the shape of the vehicle. It was an old, beat-up truck, but it wasn't the truck that concerned me. It was the two men in the front seats. I could see the tattoos on their arms, the dark clothes, and the unmistakable look of trouble written all over their faces. My pulse quickened as I watched them pull into the driveway. This was not the kind of visitor I wanted tonight. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but something told me they were no friends of mine, and they certainly weren't here for a friendly visit. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the back door, silently as a shadow, and made my way to the woods behind the cabin. I needed to see who they were and what they were after. The last thing I wanted was to put the little girl in danger, but I knew I couldn't let these men get any closer. Not without answers. As I crouched low behind a thick tree, I watched them get out of the truck and walk toward the front door. One of the men knocked twice, but there was no response. They turned back toward the truck, talking in low voices. I couldn't make out the words, but their body language said everything I needed to know. These men weren't here to negotiate. They were here to find someone. And that someone was probably inside this cabin. I crouched behind the thick tree, my breath steady but my heart racing. I could feel the cold of the night seeping through my jacket, but my mind was elsewhere, focused on the two men outside the cabin. They were no ordinary visitors. They weren't here for a social call. I had to make sure they didn't get any closer to the girl. As I watched them, one of them walked back to the truck, and the other began pacing in front of the cabin, looking at the windows, the door, as if trying to decide how best to break in. My grip tightened on the handle of my gun. I didn't know who these men were, but they weren't leaving here without answers. The last thing I needed was for them to hurt her. My mind flashed back to the girl. She was asleep now, wrapped in blankets on the couch, her body finally beginning to warm up after the freezing cold of the night. But I knew she was scared. She had trusted me to keep her safe, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. The men's voices rose slightly, and I caught a few words. "She's here," one of them said. "I told you we'd find her." That sent a chill down my spine. Who were they talking about? What did they want with her? I leaned forward, trying to hear better, but the wind shifted, and I could no longer make out the conversation. The last thing I needed was for them to realize I was out here. I had to act fast. I carefully turned away from the tree and started to circle around to the back of the cabin. I needed to get back inside without being seen, without making a sound. The moonlight barely lit my way, but I had done this countless times before. Stealth was second nature to me. As I approached the back door, I paused for a moment, glancing over my shoulder. The men were still near the front of the cabin, their figures outlined by the dim light from the truck. They didn't notice me slip through the back door, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Inside, the girl was still sleeping. I quietly shut the door behind me and moved to the small kitchen to grab a knife. The men outside were not just ordinary strangers. They were dangerous, and I had to be ready for anything. I wasn't sure what they wanted, but I knew they weren't leaving without a fight. I walked over to the couch where the girl lay, her small frame almost swallowed by the blankets. She stirred slightly as I knelt beside her. "Hey," I whispered softly. "Are you awake?" She blinked a few times, looking at me with those same wide, scared eyes. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need you to stay quiet, okay?" I said gently, trying to keep my voice calm. "There are some bad men outside. I'm going to make sure they don't hurt you, but I need you to stay still and be quiet, all right?" She nodded, though her fear was palpable. She didn't fully understand, but she trusted me. I could see it in her eyes. I stood up and went to the window, peeking through the blinds. The men were still there, moving around in the dark. One of them had a flashlight, and he was scanning the ground, probably looking for signs of where I had gone. I didn't know how much longer we had before they decided to make their move, but I couldn't just wait for them to come knocking. I grabbed the girl's hand and helped her up from the couch. She winced slightly, her legs stiff from sitting too long, but she didn't complain. "Can you walk?" I asked quietly. She nodded, though she still looked uncertain. I guided her toward the back door, but as I reached for the knob, I heard the men outside shouting. One of them had seen the broken window, and now they were making their way toward the back of the cabin. My heart skipped a beat. It was time to go. I pulled the girl into the hallway, leading her toward the basement stairs. We didn't have much time. I had to get her out of here before they reached the door. We descended into the darkness, and I carefully shut the door behind us. I knew the basement was cold, but it would hide us for now. There were old boxes and crates piled high, a perfect place to hide. I crouched behind a stack of boxes, pulling the girl close to me. "Stay quiet," I whispered. "They won't find us down here if we're quiet." She nodded, holding onto my arm, her small hand shaking. I could hear the men's voices getting louder, their footsteps coming closer. I held my breath, trying to stay as still as possible. The basement was eerily silent except for the sound of our breathing and the muffled voices from above. The footsteps stopped, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I couldn't see them, but I could feel their presence above us, searching for us. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. For sure, I wasn't going to let them take her. Not now, not ever. And as I waited in the dark, I felt the weight of the promise I had made. I would protect this girl, no matter what. The storm outside raged on, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in a fight I could win. I could hear the footsteps above us, slow and methodical, as the men searched the cabin. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept as still as possible, my breathing shallow so they wouldn't hear us. The girl was clutching my arm tightly, her small body trembling with fear. I whispered to her softly, "Stay close to me. Don't make a sound." Her wide eyes stared up at me, full of trust, but also full of confusion. She had no idea who these men were, or what they wanted. And honestly, neither did I. The footsteps paused for a moment. I could hear them talking in low voices, but I couldn't make out the words. I strained my ears, waiting for any clue that would tell me what they were planning. Then, I heard one of them shout, "They've got to be in here. Look for the girl." My stomach dropped. They were getting closer, and the basement offered no escape. The girl's grip on my arm tightened, and I could feel her fear mounting. I had to act fast. I could hear them moving toward the stairs, and I knew I didn't have much time. I had to get us out of here, but how? I reached down and grabbed the girl's hand. "Come on, we have to move," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I could feel her hesitation, but I pulled her with me toward the back corner of the basement. There was a small, hidden door there, something I had noticed when I first moved in. It was meant to be a storage area, but in a moment like this, it was our only chance to escape. I pushed the door open slowly, careful not to make any noise. It creaked, but thankfully, the men upstairs didn't hear it. We slipped into the narrow, dark passage that led to the outside. The cold air hit me immediately, but there was no time to think about that. The only thing that mattered was getting the girl to safety. I motioned for her to follow me, and we moved quickly, staying as quiet as possible. The ground was covered in snow, and it crunched under our feet, but I kept moving forward. We had to get far enough away from the cabin so they wouldn't track us. As we moved through the trees, I could hear the wind howling, but nothing else. It felt like the world had gone silent. My mind was racing. Who were those men? Why were they looking for the girl? The questions kept piling up, but I couldn't stop to think about them now. I had to keep moving. The girl's breathing was ragged, and I could feel her shaking beside me. "You okay?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm. She nodded, but I could tell she was scared. "We're almost there," I said, trying to reassure her, even though I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep this up. We had to get to town. We had to find help. But the night was closing in, and the storm was only getting worse. I could barely see the path ahead, but I kept moving. The girl's hand was still in mine, and I squeezed it, trying to offer her some comfort. "I'm not going to let them get you," I said, more to myself than to her. It was the truth. I wouldn't let anything happen to her, no matter what. As we moved deeper into the woods, I heard the sound of a car engine in the distance. It was faint, but it was there. My heart skipped a beat. Were the men still following us? I didn't know. I couldn't risk looking back. The last thing I needed was for them to catch up. We had to keep going. The road was just ahead, and once we were there, we could find a way to get to safety. But as we reached the edge of the trees, I froze. There, in the distance, I could see headlights. A car was coming straight toward us. My pulse quickened, and I pulled the girl closer, trying to shield her from view. The car slowed as it approached, the headlights cutting through the darkness. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't see us. The car stopped a few yards away, and I could hear the engine. Cut off. My stomach was in knots. Were these the men? Or someone else? I couldn't take any chances. I grabbed the girl's hand and started to back away into the trees. But then, a voice called out, "Hey, is everything okay?" It was a man's voice, but it wasn't one of the men who had been after us. I turned cautiously, my eyes narrowing to make out the figure in the shadows. The man stepped forward, and I could see the outline of a truck behind him. He was wearing a thick coat, and there was a look of concern on his face. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice calm. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but something about him seemed genuine. I stepped forward slowly, keeping the girl close to me. "We're okay," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Just trying to get out of the storm." The man nodded, glancing over his shoulder at the truck. "You two need a ride?" he asked. I looked at him, weighing my options. This could be our chance to get to safety, but I wasn't sure I could trust him. I glanced down at the girl, who was still trembling. She was scared, and I didn't want to make her more afraid. But then again, staying out here in the woods wasn't an option either. The storm was getting worse, and the men who had been after us were still out there somewhere. "Yes," I said, finally making up my mind. "We could use a ride." The man smiled and stepped aside, motioning for us to get in the truck. I helped the girl into the passenger seat and climbed in beside her. As the truck started moving, I glanced out the window, my mind still racing. Who were those men, and why were they after her? I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in deeper trouble than I had realized. But for now, we were safe. At least, for the moment. I sat in the truck beside the girl, the engine humming as we made our way through the snow-covered streets. The man driving hadn't said much, but he kept glancing at us, his eyes full of curiosity. I knew he was wondering about our story, about why we were out there in the middle of a storm, with no place to go. I didn't blame him. Anyone would be suspicious if they saw two strangers in the dead of night, especially in these conditions. The girl was still huddled against me, her small frame trembling. I could tell she was exhausted, but the fear was still in her eyes. She hadn't said a word since we got in the truck, and I wasn't sure what to say to make her feel safe. The road ahead was long and dark, and the only sound was the tires crunching through the snow. I tried to keep my focus on the man driving, but my mind kept drifting back to the events of the night. Who were those men? And why were they after her? I needed answers, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the truth. The girl's small voice broke through my thoughts. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly, her voice shaky. I looked down at her and smiled gently. "We're just going to get somewhere safe," I said, my voice calm. "We'll find some help." She nodded, but didn't look convinced. I could tell she didn't believe me, but she was too tired to argue. I could feel her grip on my hand tightening as the truck rolled on. The storm outside had picked up again, and the wind howled through the trees, making everything feel even more isolated. The man driving finally spoke. "Where are you two heading?" he asked, his tone soft but inquisitive. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to tell him. I didn't want to give too much away, not yet. But I also knew we couldn't keep pretending like everything was normal. "We're just looking for a place to stay," I said, keeping my answer vague. "We got separated from some people we were with." The man nodded, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He didn't fully believe me, but he didn't press the issue. "You two got family around here?" he asked after a few moments of silence. I shook my head. "No family," I replied, my voice quiet. "Just trying to get by." The man seemed to process that for a moment before nodding again. He didn't seem to have any further questions, so we fell back into an uncomfortable silence. I kept my focus on the road ahead, but my mind was racing. There was something off about this whole situation, something I couldn't shake. Who were the men who had been chasing us? And what did they want with the girl? I glanced at her again, and I could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. I hated seeing her like this. She was just a child. She shouldn't have to go through this. I reached out and gently brushed her hair out of her face. "You're going to be okay," I whispered, trying to offer some comfort. She didn't respond, but I could tell she heard me. Her eyes softened for just a moment, and I took that as a sign that she was starting to trust me, even if just a little. We drove on for what felt like hours, the storm showing no signs of letting up. The truck finally slowed as we approached a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of town. It was nothing fancy, just a few cabins scattered around a parking lot, but it was a place to rest for the night. The man parked the truck and turned off the engine. "This is where I stay," he said, looking over at us. "You two can crash here for the night. I'll get you set up with a room." I nodded in appreciation. "Thanks," I said. "We'll just stay for the night, then figure things out tomorrow." The man didn't seem to mind. He opened the door and stepped out, motioning for us to follow him. I helped the girl out of the truck, and we made our way to one of the cabins. The man unlocked the door and stepped inside, flicking on the lights. It was a small, basic room, but it was warm and dry, and that was all we needed. "I'll get you a blanket," the man said, walking to the bed and pulling a few sheets off. He set them down on the couch. "You two can sleep here for the night. I'll take the bed." I nodded again, feeling a small sense of relief. We were safe, at least for now. The man didn't seem to have any ill intentions, and the girl could finally get some rest. I helped her get settled on the couch, tucking the blanket around her small frame. I watched as she curled up, her eyes fluttering shut almost immediately. She was finally getting some peace. I stood up and moved toward the door, my mind still swirling with unanswered questions. The man had stepped outside to get something from his truck, and I took the opportunity to step out onto the porch. The cold air hit me immediately, and I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders. I needed some time to think. The storm was still raging, the wind howling through the trees. But it was quiet out here, and for the first time in a while, I had a moment of peace. I thought about the girl, about her future, about what the hell was really going on. I didn't know where this road was leading us, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let her go. I had to protect her, no matter the cost. I turned back and stepped inside the cabin, closing the door softly behind me. The girl was asleep on the couch, her small body curled up in the blanket. I watched her for a moment before turning to the man, who was now sitting at the table. "Thanks again for the help," I said quietly. He looked up and nodded. "No problem. Just keep it down, all right? People are already starting to notice you too." I nodded, understanding the warning. The last thing we needed was to draw attention to ourselves. For now, all I could do was keep the girl safe and pray that tomorrow would bring some answers. I woke up to the sound of the wind howling outside, the storm still raging as the first light of morning filtered through the cracks in the cabin. I hadn't slept much. My mind had been racing all night, trying to figure out what the hell was going on and why those men were looking for the girl. I looked over at her, still curled up on the couch, her small form wrapped tightly in a blanket. She looked peaceful, finally free from the terror of the night before. For now, she was safe, and that's all that mattered. I stood up quietly, careful not to disturb her. The man who had helped us was still asleep in the bed, snoring lightly. I made my way to the small kitchen area, where I poured myself a cup of coffee. The bitter taste did little to calm my nerves, but it was a start. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, and the weight of the situation hung over me like a storm cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't out of danger yet. I needed answers, and I needed to know who was after the girl. I had to find out why they were looking for her. I glanced over at the girl, still asleep, and felt a pang of guilt. I had promised to protect her, but I was no closer to understanding what she had gotten herself mixed up in. I walked over to the window and peered out through the frosted glass. The snow was falling in thick sheets, covering the ground and the trees in a blanket of white. Everything outside looked peaceful, but I knew better. I had seen too much violence in my life to believe that everything could just go back to normal. There was something off about this whole situation, something I couldn't put my finger on. The girl's presence in my life, the men who were chasing her, the storm. It all felt connected in ways I couldn't understand. I took a deep breath and turned back to the girl. She was still sleeping, her face relaxed, but I knew it wouldn't last long. As soon as she woke up, she would be scared again. I needed to figure out how to handle this, how to keep her safe. I needed to find answers. I was still lost in thought when I heard the man shift in the bed behind me. He groaned softly, stretching as he woke up. I turned around, and he rubbed his eyes, looking at me with a groggy expression. "Morning," he said, his voice low. "You sleep okay?" I nodded, not wanting to get into it. "Yeah, just thinking." He nodded as he sat up, the sheets rustling around him. "About what?" I hesitated, unsure how much to say. I didn't know if I could trust him yet, but he had helped us, and that meant something. "The girl," I said finally. "Who is she? And why are those guys after her?" The man's expression darkened at the mention of the girl. He glanced over at her, then back at me. "I don't know," he said slowly. "But I know people, and I've seen things. I don't think she's just some random kid. She's been through something, and those men, whoever they are, they've been looking for her for a reason." I frowned, trying to process his words. "What kind of reason?" "I don't know, man. I wish I did," he said, standing up and walking toward the window. "But I've seen enough in my life to know when something's off. And this is off." I walked over to the window with him, looking out at the storm. I had a bad feeling in my gut, one that had been growing stronger by the minute. "We can't just sit here," I said, my voice firm. "We need to get her out of here. And we need to figure out who those men are and what they want." The man turned to look at me, his eyes narrowed. "You're not wrong. But you're also not thinking straight. Those men aren't just going to give up. They've been looking for her, and now they know she's here. We can't keep running forever." I clenched my fists, frustration building inside me. I didn't have a plan, but I wasn't about to let anyone hurt her. "Then we fight back?" I said through gritted teeth. The man gave me a skeptical look. "Fight back? You really think we can take on whoever's behind this? We're not talking about some local thugs. These guys know what they're doing." I stared at him, my jaw tight. I wasn't about to back down. "I don't care," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not letting them take her. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her." The man studied me for a moment, and then he nodded. "All right, we'll do it your way. But you need to know, this isn't just going to be about running and hiding anymore. Once they know we're here, there's no going back." I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I know." I turned back to the girl, still sleeping peacefully. She had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep her safe. But I had made a promise to her, and I wasn't going to let her down. I didn't care what it took. I would protect her, no matter the cost. As I walked toward the door, the man followed me. We were about to face whatever danger lay ahead, and I wasn't going to face it alone. We had a plan, and we had each other. And that was all we needed. I opened the door, and the cold air hit me like a slap in the face. The storm had worsened, but I was ready. We were ready. And together, we were going to figure out what was really going on and get the girl to safety. There was no turning back now. I stepped outside into the biting cold, the storm whipping around us, as the man and I made our way to the truck. The girl was still inside, curled up under the blankets, her small body trembling with exhaustion. The last few hours had been a blur, but now it was time to take action. I couldn't keep hiding, hoping that things would somehow settle down. The men who were after her were still out there, and the clock was ticking. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, but I wasn't about to back down. The man, whose name I still didn't know, had agreed to help, but I could tell he wasn't entirely on board with my plan. He'd warned me that going after the people chasing us would only lead to more trouble, but I wasn't interested in playing it safe anymore. This wasn't just about the girl anymore. It was about doing what was right. We had to fight back. We had to find out who these men were and why they were after her. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel as the engine roared to life. The truck's headlights cut through the thick snow, illuminating the road ahead, but I could still feel the darkness pressing in on all sides. The man sat beside me, his eyes scanning the road. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice rough from the cold. "I don't know yet," I replied, my voice steady. "But we need to find answers. We need to know who's behind this and what they want with her." The man was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "You're not thinking this through," he said finally. "We're not just dealing with some small-time criminals here. These guys, whoever they are, they're dangerous." I nodded, my grip tightening on the wheel. "I know, but I can't just let them hurt her." The man exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're right, but there's no telling what we're walking into. You really want to go up against people who have no problem putting someone in the ground." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I knew what he was saying, but I also knew what had to be done. "I'm not backing down," I said firmly. "We'll deal with it when we get there." The man didn't respond, but I could see the look in his eyes. He wasn't thrilled about the plan, but he was sticking with me. For now, that was enough. The snow continued to fall heavily around us as we drove through the empty streets. The truck's engine hummed steadily, but every minute felt like an eternity. I could feel the tension building, the weight of the situation bearing down on me, but I kept my focus on the road ahead. I didn't know what we were walking into, but I wasn't going to let fear stop me. We had to do this. As we approached the edge of town, I saw a figure in the distance, a silhouette against the white backdrop of the snowstorm. It was hard to make out any details, but the man standing there looked familiar. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the icy road. The man beside me looked at me in confusion. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked. "I think I know him," I said, my voice low. "I think he's one of them." The man's eyes narrowed as he glanced out the window. "You sure?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure, but I had a feeling in my gut. A feeling that this was the lead we needed. Without another word, I turned the truck off the road and pulled into a nearby alley, keeping my distance from the figure ahead. I kept the truck running, the headlights cutting through the falling snow. "Stay here," I said, looking at the man. "I'll go check it out." The man opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "Stay? I'll be quick." I got out of the truck, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. My breath fogged up in front of me as I made my way toward the figure standing in the snow. The closer I got, the more details came into view. It was a man in a dark coat, his face hidden beneath a hood. But as I stepped closer, I saw the tattoos on his hands, familiar markings that made my stomach churn. This was one of them, one of the men who had been looking for the girl. I stopped a few feet away, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. The man looked up at me, and for a moment, there was silence. Then he spoke, his voice low and menacing. "You shouldn't have interfered." I felt a rush of adrenaline flood my system. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was the moment I'd been waiting for. "What do you want with her?" I demanded, taking a step closer. The man's eyes flicked to the side, toward the truck. "You're not going to stop us," he said, his voice almost a growl. "She's ours." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to lash out. "I'm not letting you take her." The man chuckled darkly. "You think you can stop us?" he sneered. You're in way over your head. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let them show. I wasn't backing down. I'm not alone, I said, my voice low. We're not alone. Just as I said that, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I turned, my heart racing, but it wasn't another man coming to ambush us. It was the girl. She had followed me outside, her small figure standing in the doorway of the truck, her eyes wide with fear but determination. Please, she said, her voice small but steady. Don't hurt him. The man looked at her, his eyes narrowing. Get back in the truck, I said, my voice sharp. But she didn't move. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out toward the man. Please, she repeated. He's not the bad guy. He's trying to help me. The word stopped me in my tracks. I looked at her, and for a moment, everything felt still. The storm, the danger, the fear, it all faded away as I saw the trust in her eyes. She was right. We weren't alone. And together, we could face whatever was coming. I could feel the tension in the air as the man eyed the girl, and then me, his posture shifting slightly, as if weighing his options. I stood there, not moving, not backing down. The girl had spoken, and in her voice was a quiet strength that made me pause. For a moment, the wind seemed to still, and the storm outside seemed to fade, leaving only silence between us. Please, she said again, her voice small but firm. He's not bad. He's trying to help me. I looked at her, seeing the trust in her eyes, and it struck me like a punch to the gut. She was so much braver than I had given her credit for. The man looked between the girl and me, his eyes narrowing as if calculating the risk of what was happening. For a moment, I thought he might attack, or worse, pull out a weapon. But instead, he stepped back, his stance relaxing slightly. You're lucky, kid, he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. You won't last long with him. You think he's going to protect you forever. I stepped forward, my jaw clenched tight, ready to respond. But the girl, surprisingly, held up her hand, stopping me. She looked at the man, her face full of determination despite the obvious fear in her eyes. I don't need him forever, she said quietly. I just need him now. The man blinked, taken aback by her words, and for a moment, I thought he might laugh. But instead, his expression hardened, and he gave a low growl. You're all fools, he spat. But it's not over. We'll find you. It's only a matter of time. With that, he turned, walking away into the storm, his footsteps fading into the night. I stayed where I was, not moving, watching him disappear into the snow. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. But at least for now, we had bought ourselves some time. The girl's grip on my hand tightened, and I looked down at her, seeing her face still tense with fear, but also relief. I felt a small flicker of hope deep inside me. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this. You're okay, I said quietly, squeezing her hand. You're safe for now. She didn't say anything, just nodded. But I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, and I knew that she was trying to hold it all together. I wanted to say more, to reassure her further, but I didn't know what else to say. The storm still raged around us, and I knew that we couldn't just stay here. Not with the danger still out there. The girl had spoken her truth, and I had heard it. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I turned to the man who had driven us here. He was watching us, still standing by the truck, his face unreadable. You good? I asked, trying to keep the mood light. He gave me a look, his eyes hardening again. Yeah, he said, his voice gruff. But you're not out of the woods yet. Those guys won't stop. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I know. There was a long silence between us, the only sound the howling wind and the creaking of the cabin. The man didn't move, didn't say anything else. I couldn't blame him. He had helped us, but I knew he was thinking about his own safety now. The storm outside had only gotten worse, and with the danger of the men still looming over us, I knew we couldn't stay here for long. The girl and I had to get moving. I turned to her, seeing her still shivering despite the warmth of the blankets. We need to leave, I said softly. She looked up at me, her face pale and exhausted. Where will we go? She asked, her voice quiet but full of concern. We'll figure it out, I said, my voice steady despite the uncertainty. But right now, we need to keep moving. Stay close to me, okay? She nodded again, and we both stood up. The man looked at us as we prepared to leave, but he didn't stop us. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. I didn't know what his game was, but I wasn't going to waste time figuring it out. The girl needed protection, and that was all that mattered. I opened the door, letting the cold air rush in. The snow had piled up outside, making everything look like a frozen wasteland. But it was our only way out. I glanced at the girl, who was standing beside me, still holding my hand tightly. "Ready?" I asked. She didn't say anything, but I could see the determination in her eyes. She was ready, even if she didn't fully understand what was happening. We stepped out into the storm together, the wind biting at our skin and the snow swirling around us. The truck was still parked nearby, and I motioned for the girl to follow me. We had to get to safety, whatever that meant. We didn't know where we were going, or how long it would take to find somewhere safe, but I knew we couldn't stay here. The world outside seemed endless, full of danger, but I wasn't going to stop. Not until I had answers, and not until she was safe. The girl had no idea what lay ahead, but I would protect her for as long as I could. We kept walking, our steps heavy in the snow, the world around us swallowed by the storm. The cold was unbearable, but we pushed forward. I wasn't sure where the road would take us, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had a purpose, and I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. I walked alongside the girl, my steps heavy in the snow, but we kept moving forward. The storm was relentless, the snow swirling around us in a thick curtain that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The cold was biting, and I could feel it creeping into my bones, but it didn't matter. We had to keep going. I glanced at the girl, her small figure almost swallowed by the heavy jacket I'd given her. Her face was pale, but she was holding up, trying to stay strong, despite the fear I could see in her eyes. We'd been walking for what felt like hours, the world around us just a blur of white, but I couldn't afford to stop. The danger was still out there, and I needed to get her to safety. The man who had helped us earlier was still somewhere in the back of my mind, but I didn't trust him completely. I didn't trust anyone anymore. All that mattered was the girl. I kept checking over my shoulder, scanning the road behind us, half expecting the men to show up any minute. I didn't know where they were, or how close they were, but the feeling of being hunted never went away. Every step we took felt like we were moving deeper into the unknown, but there was no turning back now. I had made a promise, and I was going to keep it. The girl tugged on my sleeve, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked down at her, and she gave me a small, uncertain smile. "Are we almost there?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost drowned out by the storm. I gave her the best reassuring smile I could manage. "Almost," I said, even though I wasn't sure if that was true. I just needed to keep her calm, to keep her from panicking. She nodded, but I could tell she was scared. I could feel it too. I didn't know what to do next. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. But I couldn't stop. Not now. The wind howled, and the snow stung my face as we trudged through the wilderness, the world around us an endless sea of white. The road had long since disappeared under the snow, and we were walking on nothing but instinct, following the only path that seemed to make sense. I was just about to say something when I heard it, the sound of a vehicle. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound of an engine, muffled by the storm, but unmistakable. The girl looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "What is it?" she whispered. I didn't answer right away. I needed to be sure, needed to know if this was the men, or just some random car passing by. The noise grew louder, and I turned, straining to make out the shape through the snow. A set of headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the white veil of the storm. It was a truck. I didn't know if it was a friend or a foe, but I had to act fast. "Get behind me," I said, pushing the girl gently toward a large rock that was partially buried in the snow. She didn't argue, simply moved behind it, her small form nearly hidden from view. I kept my eyes on the approaching vehicle, watching as it got closer. The truck slowed, and I could hear the engine idling. I stayed crouched behind the rock, my hand on the grip of the gun I had kept hidden in my jacket. My breath was shallow, my pulse racing. I had to be ready. The truck came to a stop a few feet away, and the door opened. I couldn't see who it was, but I was ready for anything. I stepped forward, my movements slow but purposeful, my eyes scanning for any sign of danger. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice carrying over the wind. There was a pause before a voice responded, low and gruff, but familiar. "It's me," the voice said. "You've got company." I froze, the words sinking in. I didn't recognize the voice immediately, but something about it clicked. The man who had helped us earlier. He had found us. But why? I could feel my heart rate pick up again. Stay down, I said to the girl, my voice low but firm. I turned back toward the truck, stepping into the light of the headlights. The man was leaning against the truck, his arms crossed, a look of frustration on his face. You really thought you could just walk off into the storm and everything would be fine? He said, his voice laced with a touch of disbelief. I told you, those guys won't stop. You can't keep running forever. I didn't respond right away. He was right. I had been hoping for some kind of miracle, that we would make it to safety without further trouble, but now I realized how naive that had been. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no way of knowing who else might be out there looking for us. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice rough. He sighed, pushing off the truck and walking toward me. I'm trying to help, he said, his tone softer now. I'm not your enemy, you know, but I can't keep watching you two walk into a trap. I didn't trust him, but he had helped us once already. What do you suggest? I asked, the words coming out harsher than I intended. He glanced over at the girl, still hidden behind the rock. We head into town. Get out of this damn storm, he said. You're not going to get far like this. Those guys will catch up to you, and they won't be gentle. I hesitated, looking at the girl. She was still watching from behind the rock, her small face barely visible. I didn't want to involve her any more than I had to, but we couldn't keep running forever. I nodded, albeit reluctantly. All right, I said. We'll go with you, but no funny business. He gave me a small nod, a faint smile on his lips. No funny business, he agreed. Let's get you both somewhere safe. I motioned for the girl to come out from behind the rock. She stepped out cautiously, her eyes scanning the area before settling on me. Are we going to be okay? She asked, her voice trembling. I smiled at her, trying to reassure her, though I wasn't sure myself. Yeah, kid, I said. We're going to be okay. The man led us back toward the truck, and we climbed in. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a while, I felt like we were taking control. The storm raged outside, but we were moving forward. And that's all that mattered. I could feel the truck's engine humming beneath me as we sped through the snow-covered roads. The storm outside had settled into a constant, heavy snowfall, making the world around us look like a blank canvas. The only sounds in the truck were the steady hum of the engine and the occasional sigh from the girl in the back seat. I glanced over at the man driving, his face set in concentration as his hands gripped the wheel tightly. There was a certain tension in the air, a sense of unease that lingered despite the fact that we were finally moving towards some kind of safety. The girl was silent, her small body hunched in the back seat, still wrapped in the blanket. She hadn't said much since we left the cabin, and I could tell she was trying to make sense of everything. I couldn't blame her. It had been a hell of a night for both of us, but especially for her. The road was slippery, the snow making it difficult to see much further than a few yards ahead, but the man drove with a sense of urgency. His eyes were constantly scanning the road, and I could tell he was aware of every sound, every shift in the air. I didn't know him well, but I could see the weight of experience in his movements. This wasn't his first time navigating danger. How much further? I asked, my voice breaking the silence. The man glanced over at me briefly, his face unreadable. Not far, he said, his voice low. We'll hit town soon enough. Just need to keep the girl safe for now. I nodded, but a part of me wasn't sure how much further we could go without attracting more attention. The storm had slowed the men down for now, but I knew they wouldn't give up easily. They had been after the girl for a reason, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. I leaned back in my seat, trying to relax, but the tension in my shoulders wouldn't go away. I kept thinking about the girl. Her face, her trust in me, the way she looked at me as if I was her only hope. I couldn't let her down. I had to protect her. The road stretched on, the truck's headlights cutting through the thick snow. The man seemed lost in his thoughts, his eyes flicking back and forth between the road and the rearview mirror. Every so often, he would glance at me, as if checking if I was still alert. He wasn't wrong to be cautious. The storm made it harder for anyone to track us, but it also made it harder to trust anyone, even those who were trying to help. I turned to look at the girl again. She was still curled up in the back seat, her face pressed against the glass as she stared out at the snow. I could see the exhaustion in her posture, but she wasn't crying anymore. I had a feeling that the silence between us wasn't just about the storm. It was about something deeper. She had been through something awful, and no amount of running would erase that. The girl had been abandoned, left to fend for herself in a world that didn't seem to care. I wondered what had happened to her family, where she had come from, and what had put her in the path of these men. But those answers would have to wait. For now, I had to focus on keeping her alive. We drove in silence for a few more miles, the snow beginning to lighten as we neared the edge of town. I could see the faint outlines of buildings in the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow. The man slowed the truck as we entered the outskirts, his eyes scanning the area. "We'll stop here," he said, pulling off the main road into a small, dilapidated parking lot behind a row of old buildings. I looked around, my hand instinctively moving to the door handle. The area was quiet, almost eerily so. It didn't feel like a safe place, but then again, nowhere felt safe right now. "Stay in the truck," the man said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "I'll go check things out." I nodded and looked at the girl, who was staring at me, her wide eyes full of uncertainty. "It's okay," I said softly, trying to reassure her. "I'm not going anywhere. Just stay put, all right?" She nodded, but I could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. I wasn't sure what I was going to do once we were inside town, but I couldn't just sit here and wait. The men were still out there, and I wasn't about to let them find us. The truck's engine sputtered to a stop, and the man got out without another word. I sat in the quiet, my thoughts racing. I kept glancing out the window, watching for any sign of movement. The snow had stopped for now, but the air was thick with tension. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't over yet. The man had left the door open a crack, and I could hear him walking around outside, his boots crunching in the snow. I waited, barely able to sit still. What was he doing? Was he really checking things out, or was he just buying time? My fingers drummed nervously against the armrest, my eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the darkened street ahead. I needed to know what was happening, to figure out what our next move would be. After a few long minutes, I heard the man's voice outside the truck. "All clear," he said, his tone flat. I exhaled in relief, but I knew better than to relax. We still had a long way to go, and the danger wasn't over. I opened the truck door, stepping out into the cold, and the girl followed behind me, still wrapped in her blanket. We moved quickly, the man leading the way toward a small, run-down building at the edge of the lot. As we neared the door, I could hear the sounds of muffled voices from inside. I didn't know what kind of place this was, but it wasn't the kind of place I wanted to trust. The man knocked twice, and the door creaked open. A face appeared, peering out into the night. The man nodded at him. "We need a place to stay." The man at the door didn't say anything for a moment, then stepped aside, motioning for us to enter. "Come in," he said, his voice gruff. I didn't hesitate. The girl was already inside, and I followed close behind. The door shut with a heavy thud, and we were once again thrust into the unknown. I stepped inside the dimly lit room, the heavy door creaking shut behind us. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of stale cigarettes and old wood filled my nostrils. It wasn't the kind of place I would have chosen, but right now, it was our only option. The man who had let us in didn't say anything as he motioned for us to sit at one of the worn tables in the corner. The girl hesitated, glancing around at the shabby interior, but I gave her a reassuring smile. "It's okay," I whispered. "We'll be fine." She nodded but didn't respond, still clinging to the blanket around her shoulders. I could see the exhaustion on her face, but there was something else there too, something that spoke of a quiet fear she hadn't fully let go of. I turned to the man who had brought us here. He was leaning against the bar, his eyes scanning the room. "What now?" I asked, my voice low. He looked over at me, his face hardening slightly. "Now we wait. If you're hoping for a clean escape, you're not going to find it here." I frowned, but didn't say anything. I wasn't looking for a way out. I was looking for answers. The girl had been through enough already. I couldn't let whatever was chasing her win. "Do you know who they are?" I asked. The man didn't answer right away. He seemed to be weighing whether to say more, but finally, he spoke, his voice rough. "They're not local. They're part of something bigger. I don't know the full story, but they're dangerous. And they've got resources." My mind raced as I processed his words. Bigger, dangerous, resources. This wasn't just a random group of criminals. Whatever was going on, it was much larger than I had anticipated. I glanced at the girl, still sitting on the chair, looking small and out of place in this rough environment. I had promised her I would protect her, but this felt like a fight I couldn't win on my own. The man noticed my gaze and followed it, his expression softening just a bit. "She's safe here for now," he said. "But we need to figure out what to do next. We can't keep running forever." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. I couldn't keep her hidden forever. There had to be a way to end this. There had to be a way to find out why they were after her. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor, the sound too loud in the quiet room. I'll go find out what I can, I said, determination setting in my bones. I can't sit around and wait. The man shook his head slowly, a warning in his eyes. You don't know who you're dealing with, he said. These people don't play by the rules. You won't get any answers by walking into their trap. I didn't care. I'm not just walking in. I'm getting to the bottom of this. I turned to the girl and walked over to her. She was still staring at the floor, lost in her own thoughts. I kneeled down next to her, gently placing my hand on her shoulder. Stay here. I'll be back soon. I promise. She looked up at me, her big eyes filled with trust, but also a hint of fear. Are you going to be okay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, trying to ease her worry, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. I'll be fine, I said. I'll be right back. I stood up, giving her one last look before walking out of the room. The man followed me, stepping into the hallway with a cautious glance behind us. You sure about this? He asked. It's not too late to change your mind. I shook my head. No, I'm sure. If I don't do this, I'm putting her at more risk. He sighed, clearly not agreeing with my decision, but he didn't stop me. Instead, he walked ahead of me, leading the way out of the building. The street outside was quieter than I expected, the storm still swirling around us, but the city seemed oddly still, as if holding its breath. We walked a few blocks in silence before he stopped in front of a nondescript building with a single light flickering above the door. He glanced at me. This is where you'll get your answers, he said, his voice low. But don't expect them to be kind. I nodded, not saying anything. This was it. I was going to find out what had been happening, and I wasn't going to stop until I had answers. The man stepped aside, allowing me to approach the door. I reached for the handle, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that what lay beyond that door would change everything. I didn't know what to expect, but I was ready to face whatever was waiting for me. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The room inside was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls. At the far end of the room stood a man, his face partially obscured by the low light. He looked up as I stepped inside, his eyes narrowing. I've been expecting you, he said, his voice cold and calculating. I didn't flinch. I'm here to find out what you want with the girl. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that sent a chill down your spine. You're too late, he said, his tone dripping with satisfaction. The game's already started. I didn't know what he meant, but one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. The real fight was about to start, and I wasn't going to back down now. I stood frozen in the doorway, the man's cold, calculating smile cutting through the tension in the room. His voice still echoed in my mind. The game's already started. My mind raced, trying to process his words, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't some small-time operation. Whatever was going on, it was bigger than I had imagined. What does that mean? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. The man chuckled softly, as if enjoying the confusion in my eyes. You think you can just show up and demand answers? You've been chasing shadows, my friend. His eyes flicked to the side, and I saw two other figures in the room, their faces half hidden in the dim light. It was clear I was no longer in control. They had the upper hand. Now, you're playing a dangerous game, I said, trying to maintain some sense of authority, but I could feel the doubt creeping into my words. He stepped forward, slowly, a predator circling its prey. You don't even know who you're dealing with, do you? He said, his voice low and ominous. You're just a pawn, just like her. His words stung, but I wasn't about to let him see that. What do you want with her? I demanded again, my patience wearing thin. The man's smile widened, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. She's the key, he said simply. You've been chasing the wrong person. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The key? I had no idea what he was talking about, but something inside me told me it wasn't good. The girl has something we need, he continued, his tone now colder than ever. And you? Well, you're in the way. I could feel my blood running cold. This wasn't just about her running from some thugs. This was something much darker, and I had unknowingly become a part of it. I glanced back at the girl, who had been silent up until now. She was sitting in the corner, watching the exchange with wide, frightened eyes. I could see the confusion and fear on her face, but there was something else there, too. Something I hadn't noticed before. It was like she knew more than she was letting on. What do you mean, the key? I pressed, stepping forward, trying to get closer to the truth. The man didn't flinch. You really don't get it, do you? She's part of a much bigger plan. And you, my friend, you're just a complication. An obstacle in the way of what's coming. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. I'm not backing down, I said firmly. I'll protect her, no matter what. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by my determination. You'll protect her? How noble, he sneered. But you're already too late. She's already marked. And now, so are you. My stomach dropped. I didn't understand at all, but the weight of his words hit me hard. The girl wasn't just being hunted. She was part of something much bigger, something that involved more than just criminals after her. And now, I was in deeper than I'd ever realized. I stepped back, trying to get a better sense of the room, the atmosphere, but everything felt like it was closing in. The man was right. I had no idea what I was up against. But there was no turning back. I couldn't just walk away from this now. I wasn't about to let them take her, no matter how much bigger their game was than mine. I glanced at the girl again, her face still full of confusion and fear. You don't have to be scared, I said softly, walking toward her. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. I won't let them hurt you. She didn't speak, but her eyes softened just a little. I knew she wasn't fully trusting me yet, but she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could protect her. The man, still standing in front of me, didn't seem impressed. You really think you can protect her from us? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You have no idea what's coming. This is bigger than you. Maybe, I said, my voice low, but I'm not giving up. And neither is she. I stood firm, staring him down. The man looked at me for a moment longer, then chuckled, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. We'll see how long your little act of heroism lasts. With that, he turned and signaled to the two others in the room. They began to move, and I instinctively stepped in front of the girl, ready to protect her. But they weren't making a move to attack. Instead, they were walking toward the door. This isn't over, the man said over his shoulder. We'll be back, and when we come, you'll be the one who regrets getting involved. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned to the girl, who was still looking at me, her face pale and wide-eyed. It's not over, I said softly, my voice steady. But we've bought ourselves some time. You're safe for now. She nodded, but I could see the fear still lurking in her eyes. I didn't know how much longer we could keep running, or what the next step was. But one thing was clear, we were in this together. And I wasn't going to stop until I found out what the hell was really going on, no matter what it took.
I watched the door close behind them, the echo of its slamming shut still ringing in the air. The man's last words lingered in my mind. You'll be the one who regrets getting involved. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't, not now. The girl, still standing quietly by the wall, was staring at me, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a hint of something else. Something that looked like trust. It was a fleeting thing, but it was there. I took a deep breath, letting the chill of the air fill my lungs, grounding myself. They'll be back, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. But we're not done yet. I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. But she didn't speak. She just nodded slightly, clutching the blanket tighter around her. I knew she didn't understand the full weight of the situation. But she was smart, and she knew enough to be scared. I walked over to her and knelt down, trying to make myself as non-threatening as possible. Hey, I said softly. It's going to be okay. I won't let anything happen to you. She looked at me, her eyes still unsure, but I could see the tiny spark of hope beginning to grow. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to hold on to. I stood up slowly, turning my back on her for just a moment to look around the room. It was small and cramped, the walls covered with peeling wallpaper, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and stale beer. It wasn't much, but it was a safe place for now. We need a plan, I muttered to myself. The girl didn't respond, but I could hear her small footsteps as she came up behind me. I turned around to find her standing a few feet away, her hands still clutching the blanket. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her for a moment, unsure of how to answer. Now, I said finally, we figure out who they are, and why they're after you. And then, we make them regret it. The girl looked at me for a moment, her brow furrowed in confusion. But there was something in my tone that seemed to comfort her, even if just a little. I could see the resolve beginning to form in her eyes. What if they come back for me? She asked quietly. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had no answer for her. Then we'll be ready, I said finally. We'll be ready. I walked over to the small table in the corner of the room and grabbed the map I had found earlier. I spread it out on the table, studying it for a few moments. The town was small, isolated. There was only one main road leading in and out, and it was heavily covered by snow. It would take them time to find us. But time was something we didn't have. I glanced back at the girl, who was still standing in the doorway, watching me. I'm going to need your help, I said. She nodded slowly, her face set in determination. It was amazing how quickly she was adjusting, how quickly she was learning to be strong. We need to figure out where they're coming from, I said. And we need to find a way to get ahead of them. I could see the fear in her eyes. But there was something else, too. A quiet strength. How do we do that? She asked. We start by asking questions, I said. We talk to the people who might know something. Someone has to know who these guys are. The girl nodded, her eyes narrowing with focus. And then? She asked. Then we make our move. I didn't wait for her to respond. I grabbed my jacket, threw it over my shoulders, and moved toward the door. The cold hit me immediately. But I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. Stay here, I said to the girl, turning to look at her. I'll be back soon. But as I reached the door, she stepped forward, her eyes wide with worry. I want to help, she said, her voice trembling. Please, don't leave me alone. I stopped for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. I could see the fear in her eyes. But there was something else there too. A desire to fight back. It was a look I understood all too well. I walked back toward her, placing my hands on her shoulders. You're not alone, I said, my voice steady. I'm not leaving you, but you need to stay safe. She nodded, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. I gave her a small smile, even though I wasn't sure how to reassure myself. I won't let anything happen to you, I said softly. I promise. The girl looked up at me, her small face filled with uncertainty, but also with a growing sense of hope. Thank you, she whispered. I gave her a final nod before walking out into the cold. The wind howled as I made my way down the street, my boots crunching in the snow. Every step I took felt like it was leading us closer to the unknown. I didn't know who these men were, but I was going to find out. And when I did, I wasn't just going to make them regret it. I was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. I didn't know how long we had before they found us, but I wasn't going to waste any more time. The game was on, and I was ready to fight back.